The name of the panel is The Race to Find the Friendliest Jurisdiction, and the moderator is Justin Litchfield, the CTO of ProChain Capital. We've got Oliver Rosa, the COO of BANKFUL, Malcolm Tan, founder of Gravitas International, and we added Tim also, Tim Enneking, founder of Crypto Asset Management. So if all of you could sort of make your way to the stage, that would be fantastic. Great. And Justin, how about if I hand the microphone over to you? You can take this one, and I'll come back and get it when we do questions. All right, let's give these guys a big round of applause. Welcome.
You coming? All right. Well, this is exciting because it seems like everybody wants to hear the answer to what you guys are going to talk about. So the race to become the friendliest jurisdiction, we've had 3 speakers and a bunch of people asking questions from the audience, kind of throwing shade a little bit about jurisdictions that you guys, well, let's say that you represent them. You've obviously, Malcolm, you've got a lot of experience in kind of the East Asian region, Tim, a lot more in the Eastern European type of sphere, and then Oliver will be here kind of representing Malta, and we can just duke it out, I guess, right? Let's go. So to kind of start, though, can we begin with this race? Like, if we think about this as a race to become a friendly jurisdiction, what does the finish line of this race look like?
It's an interesting question. In diplomacy, they call it the end state, right? What you're looking at, where you want to arrive at, and it's a great question because I haven't thought about the answer to this. I've looked in great detail at 20, 30 jurisdictions, and I'll talk about it in a second. But I don't know that we even know what the end state is yet. And that's why I found Abdullah's speech very interesting, his presentation very interesting, because they don't either. Malta is a regulator, and he represents the regulator, at least wearing one of his hats. He doesn't know either. So what instead they have done is developed a law that has a tremendous amount of flexibility in it. The most important thing he said very quickly, but it was absolutely critical, and that is that law can be amended. The Innovation Act can be amended without having to go through the entire executive and legislative process again. Now, on the one hand, that's kind of frightening, right? Because that means you've got this minister that can literally unilaterally change a law. But they've done that specifically to be able to address events, address developments that as of yet are unforeseen. So I don't know that anyone could answer that question because I don't know that the end state is even visible at this point in time.
It's this is a very interesting question. I've never heard this before, but I'll draw some parallels. So first of all, the world is divided into various legal structures. There's common law, there's civil law, there's socialist law, there's traditional law, right? There's Arabic law. So you don't see any debate about which is the ultimate law, which is a bit of, an element of your question. Secondly, we see a lot of jurisdiction shopping. Blockchain, ICOs, cryptocurrency is very unique in my view because this is a worldwide industry and phenomenon that every government has difficulty grasping, and every single government has a different treatment of. And this is really unique in something that can apply across a lot of different elements of society, a lot of different elements of many industries. You have Japan, for example, which has already said, 5 currencies are legal fiat currencies. You can basically use them as legal tender. And on the other end of the spectrum, you have China that says absolutely zero trading of cryptocurrencies, right? So it's a very fragmented environment right now, and I don't see any consensus coming up in terms of what should the law be. So ultimately, it really depends on the entrepreneur, on the project, on what you want to do. If you want to have a securities defined law, go to the USA, right? It's basically almost every ICO is regarded as securities law right now. If you want it to be a utility token and somewhat free, somewhat big environment where you can still operate, a lot of projects go to Singapore, which is like number 2 in the world right now. Number 1, of course, is USA. Number 2 is Singapore this year. if you want to get into the EU, Malta is a fantastic place to get started. It's, I think, coming out ahead of the Switzerland right now, which is quite interesting. And if you want it to be very clear, very regulated, you go to Japan. But because it's very clear, very regulated there, nobody knows what to do. They're all waiting for the government to decide what they want to do and then to follow from it. So this is a very, very interesting question, right? Thanks for it, but I don't think there's a real answer.
Right, it depends, right? How about you? Do you have anything to add to this?
Yeah, well, I think what is important here is that we have this Malta Digital Innovation Authority, which will regulate the market. And I see an analogy here with the gaming industry, which was like 12 years ago when we started Malta in gaming. There was also like a kind of Wild West situation, and there are countries which was giving out licenses for gaming, and there was Malta, which took on to regulate the market. And basically now, after all the other countries watching Malta all these years doing and licensing, and then slowly bigger countries like Germany or Sweden are picking up and also issuing licenses and following what the small island of Malta has been doing for so many years. So I think this is basically where we will be going in future also. So now many countries say that the cryptocurrencies are not illegal. Some of them put out some small regulations, but at the end of the day, I think we will go to a direction like Malta does for all the other countries as well. So we will have full legal frameworks, we have authorities regulating the market, and I think that's what we need to really make this mainstream product, the whole crypto industry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a few times that's been alluded to, I think, but I think it'd be nice to expand on it a little bit. Kind of the Maltese, how they adopted the gaming, and like how this gaming to crypto transition. Can you expand on that a little bit, like how you've transitioned, because you come from the gaming space too,
yeah.
Correct?
No, I'm not from the gaming space, but this is like a similar analogy, as I said. Basically, you have two different worlds in gaming. You have the regulated world, which is Malta, and then you have other countries like Curaçao, for example, which give you very cheap and very easy licenses, but then afterwards, your company is not really controlled, not regulated. And for example, the source code that you run in your online casino applications is not being audited. So that means that, yes, you can operate there also legally, but the investors or the players in this time cannot be sure that they are not being stolen from. Mm-hmm. And I think that's why it's so important that we start here from a regulated standpoint in Malta. And I think it's the same, it will go the same way. First, we will have some unregulated market, then we'll have some small regulation, which is maybe not audited, not controlled, not really regulated. And then we'll have finally a full legal framework for all the other countries as well.
Okay, thank you. So gaming was also another, so kind of to stay on that topic, and Malcolm, you are in this kind of gray area technology. So this is where you've spent your legal career, essentially, right? And so how's that kind of informed it from that side?
Well, it's very interesting in terms of the crypto environment right now. So it's totally gray. This is one of the grayest areas of law, and especially since all the governments haven't really come to a grasp of it. And the courts are struggling to get a grip on it. So you'll see the US, the Swiss frameworks trying to bring it into the fold of securities. In fact, every government is basically regarding it as, if it's a security, then we are regulating. If it's not a security, then it's two ends of the spectrum, right? You have Japan, which I mentioned, which says that virtual currencies are regarded as currencies. Or, well, another big name would be Singapore, which says that all utility tokens will never be regarded as securities. They are still going to be considered as commodities class. But certain other licenses are going to be issued. So, for example, if your utility token acts as a payment, then you need a payments license. If you are going to be like e-money or virtual money, then you need an e-money or virtual money license. If you're going to be involved in money remittance, money changing, then you need a money changing or money remittance license. So it will be a licensing regime based on the classification of that particular token. So it's great, it's interesting, and it's a really developing industry. We are seeing more and more people coming in from the mainstream, lawyers, auditors, accountants, corporate service providers, the securities folks, they're all coming into this space. When the VCs and the private equity companies started seeing that ICOs were raising 5 to 6 times what they had raised around the world, everybody started getting into this space, right? So there's so many hedge funds coming up for crypto assets. There are so many securities firms looking into how they can get into this space. And early adopters are winning out right now.
Mm-hmm. Cool, thank you. And then just to be clear, are you, you're all kind of working on advising companies in the crypto space, is that correct? Tim, are you doing more on the investment management side, or?
Well, in 2013, I ran the first fund ever in the crypto space. And then when I left Eastern Europe, as you referred to, I formed the first ever trading fund in the crypto space. Mm-hmm. Now I've done another one in the US, which supposedly might be the first trading fund there. I'm looking at creating one in Malta now. We filed our application last week. It'll be the first trading fund in Malta. The first fund, when the law was initially changed in March, they filed, and their application, I think, is going to get approved this week, but they're a buy and hold fund. Mm-hmm. And then we're also looking at creating the world's first Sharia compliant fund. So my experience in the hedge fund space in crypto predates pretty much everyone. And in that context, I get asked probably 3 times a week to advise an ICO. I've said yes on 6 occasions over the last couple of years. Mm-hmm. Very, very selective about that, because people want the name and the reputation, everything, more than they want real work.
Right.
So sure, I advise them. In the last 15 months, for instance, we've reviewed about 3,000 ICO proposals, and we've invested in 22. And when we invest in them, whether we're formally or informally so designated, we really become an advisor.
Okay. That makes sense. Can you talk briefly about Eastern Europe and how it's kind of developed and where they are in this race? I know that Estonia in particular was doing a lot, but we haven't heard much there. And then it sounds like you've left as well. But I think that you might be our expert here on this panel to talk about that. Or are you more of a fan of the Maltese angle at this point?
I don't think there's a static answer. Whatever the answer is, I don't think there's a static answer. I don't want to blow my own presentation, but I'm actually not going to act as another shill for Malta here when I give my speech. I'm going to go through what all of the various, what virtually every jurisdiction goes through, the process a jurisdiction goes through. Estonia had the first lead. Actually, the first ICO we invested in was Estonia. Mm-hmm. Belarus, home of the last dictator in Europe, is now trying to position itself as a crypto haven of some sort. Great place to hire people out of. Don't ever put a penny other than your salary into their salaries into Belarus. The thing about Eastern Europe is there's a tremendous amount of talent and there's a tremendous amount of creativity. And if you want to find a way to exploit a loophole, ask a Russian. On the other hand, the regimes are universally unstable, they're universally corrupt, and they're universally very, very difficult to work with. And the problem is, of course, if you have any success in any of those countries, there are a lot of people who are going to want to share in your success. Great source of labor, great source of intellectual potential, lousy source for just about everything else.
All right, thanks. Malcolm, so you mentioned the last dictator, and we've kind of heard about governments that can move fast. One of the criticisms that we heard earlier and that I've heard before about Singapore is that maybe their government moves too quickly for some of the people in this environment where they feel like it's not stable enough. Can you talk to that briefly?
Okay, one of the interesting tidbits, I'm not sure whether anybody here knows, the Singaporean government is actually the most highly paid government in the world, right? Like the president and the prime minister of Singapore earns, I think, 10 times what the American president earns. So it doesn't have a corrupt environment, right? It's a fantastic place to do business. First, it's always in the top 2 or 3 places in the world consistently in rankings. It's a very open system. You can incorporate a company within a day if you know what you're doing, right? It's a very open, friendly environment for business. So if you have the right context, then it's extremely easy to get things done. But of course, a lot of the Western world is not familiar with the Eastern world, and they think, oh, it's a very big firewall. Now, the reputation for the Singapore government for being a dictatorship, I think it's, well, there are certain civil liberties which the government has taken liberties with, but in terms of the business environment and in terms of being an open economy, it's probably one of the best places in the world. So it's very easy to do business. You don't have government officials coming up to you and asking for bribes. No way, right? They end up in jail super fast. Right? So the good thing about the Singapore government is that it's the biggest, baddest one out there. Right? So nobody wants to cross it. And it has a great reputation for getting laws out fast. And because of the Mandarin system, because the officials there are very well paid, it attracts the top talent. So the government officials in Singapore are very well informed, they are very competent. I don't think you will find any government around the world that runs practically every ministry and every government department at a surplus, right? Every single government in the world is probably running at a deficit, and every single department is at a deficit. But in Singapore, it's the other way around. Practically every single ministry is making money, simply because they know how to run things well. So to answer your initial question again, it's not a matter of speed. I think the speed comprises of a few elements. Firstly, they are competent. Secondly, because the parliament is basically one party, so everything moves through super fast, right? You don't have entrenched positions lobbying against each other and getting things deadlocked in parliament. So if a bill needs to be passed, it gets passed. And the Mandarin system ensures that the government officials that are placed to regulate, to make sure things move through, know what they're doing, right? They absolutely know what they're doing. So it's a bit of a different position. I think the Maltese government is doing a fantastic job, right? But there was a question alluded to earlier, which asked this question as well. Is there competency? Even if you have a great framework, is there competency to get it done? The difference is that in Singapore, there's competency. So it's got a great framework, it's very fast, very efficient. I have been involved in both legislation as well. The Singapore upcoming one in first quarter of next year, it'll probably be out, as well as the Maltese VFA, right? And there are certain elements that are pros and cons for both regimes. But in Singapore, you can make sure that if you need something done, you can get it done, right? In Malta, in the Eastern European countries, exactly like what Tim said, the framework might look great. It looks shiny and bright from the outside, right? But once you get in there, you may not be able to get the things done. And that's a big reason why Estonia is stuck, right?
I see. Yeah, I think at this point we're kind of unproven, right? With Malta, we've got these laws announced, but we haven't battle tested these systems, and we're going to be learning a lot, I think, in the coming months about the next kind of concern, which is kind of what is the rate determining step as projects are trying to get set up and find a home. Where are they getting slowed down in some of these different jurisdictions?
Let me tell you what the biggest issue in Malta is. And somebody asked a question about the EU, whether Maltese law will be adopted by the EU, which is the tail wagging the dog, if I've ever heard a question, right? If Malta wants its laws to be adhered to, and frankly, if Malta wants to continue in the EU, if you take an extreme situation, its laws have to be consistent. So the biggest problem right now in Malta with crypto is the same thing that the biggest problem is in most every other country. You can't open a freaking bank account, right? That's the biggest issue. It's still an issue here. Why is it an issue in Malta? Because if you look at the whole list of laws there's not a single one that relates to banking. The reason there's not a single one that relates to banking is very centrally controlled in the EU by the EU. So we're actually, for the fund I'm opening, the first trip I made after I spoke with the woman who actually did the first application for a fund here was, where are we going to go? Where are we going to go to bank? Where are we going to open a bank account? Her comment, Bank of Valletta, forget it. Right? Second largest bank in Malta, the name of which I forget it. right? So we went to Sparkasse, and you've got two of them. You got the German one, you got the Austrian one. The Austrian one happens to be big in Malta. I went to Sparkasse, explained the whole shebang, what we're up about, how we work as a crypto trading fund, where our money goes, what the money flows are, everything else, who we're dealing with, auditor, administrator, all this other stuff. And they said yes, no problem. And so I asked them, how often do you say yes? How often do you say no? And keep in mind, this is the bank in Malta that's pre-selected to be favorable to crypto. And the answer was about 50% of the time we say no, about 50% of the time we say yes. So until you get some development on the EU level, there will still be issues in Malta. I think right now Malta is the best jurisdiction for crypto-related companies in the world. And I've got a lot of reason to say that. If you go on CoinDesk, for instance, and search for Bank of America, you'll see an article I wrote on how the Bank of America closed my 3-year-old daughter's Uniform Gift to Minors Act because her dad, who's the trustee on this account, gets his salary from a company that has crypto in the name. And you wouldn't believe the emails I got after this from guys who had, credit ratings in the US. There's a score that goes up to about 850, who have credit ratings above 1,800, 10 different companies, and they had all their bank accounts shut down because they sent 3 $50 wire transfers to Coinbase. Right, so Stephen, I think, was talking about how the United States is a questionable jurisdiction for crypto. Absolutely, categorically. And I am a U.S. citizen, but I'm also a Luxembourg citizen. So I have EU citizenship as well. We canvassed the entire world, including Singapore, including BVI, Bermuda, Puerto Rico, Belarus, of all places. Looked at the entire planet. And right now, it's very, very clear, even before last week's laws, because there were 3 other laws passed in March, Malta is hands down, as a general principle, the best place on the planet for crypto. How long that'll last, whether it'll continue, those are open questions. But that doesn't mean it's a panacea. It still has to work within the EU. That creates another set of problems and uncertainties. It's still a stone cold bitch to open a bank account. I'm sorry. And you can do it in Malta. You can't do it in other places. But it is not easy here, just like it's not any place else. Plus, the other thing is all these laws are new. The oldest ones were in March. The newest ones are 10 days old. How are they going to work? Is there going to be pushback from the EU? Maybe they'll be used as models going forward. Fabulous. But right now, I'm going to have 4 different funds in 4 different jurisdictions with 3 different legal systems. I like what you said. I'm avoiding Soviet law, socialist law for the moment. But I'm doing common. I'm doing civil, and I'm very hard looking at Sharia. Because I don't know which one's going to win. Anyone who puts all of his eggs in one basket, jurisdictional or otherwise, is insane. So I think I've actually coined a term in this regard several months ago called jurisdictional diversification. Right? So Malta right now looks like a fabulous place to do business in the crypto space. There are issues here like there are issues anyplace else. There are probably fewer issues here as a general rule than any place else. So this is looks to be an absolute fabulous place to at least have a significant footprint. But to move absolutely everything here, like moving absolutely everything to Estonia or absolutely everything to Singapore, some guy named Lee will have a grandchild one day and run the place then. So there are every place has its own issues, right? The one citizenship I have from the U.S., do not go there, and I'll discuss that in more detail when I do my presentation. The other place I have a citizenship is the EU. Not sure about that, right? But it looks like one of the best places now in Malta, based on the most recent information I've been able to gather, and I looked hard, is right now the best place to set up a crypto business. So sorry for my Maltese host if I didn't make it sound perfect, but it's damn good.
Thank you. That's a fascinating answer. You want to respond?
Just a small thing about the banks. Well, I know that the situation until now was not really perfect for the bank accounts, But now we have at least one bank which open bank account on a face-to-face interview and a project review. Also, the acceptance rate is not 100% yet, that's true. But as soon as all the laws are implemented, also the other banks will at least reconsider their position. That's what I said. So even Bank of Valletta, maybe next year, should be able to open your bank accounts then.
Maybe next year. You wait to see what the first Maltese bank does what Sparkasse does when I send $10 million to Sparkasse, and then I send it off to Bitstamp, which is another EU entity.
Good luck with
you
that.
wait and tell me what happens. Right, exactly.
Right, and I've seen several projects I've been involved with them that wound up getting Singapore bank accounts open. They do their ICO, they get a big wire in from Cumberland, and boom, like everything's done. So,
Okay, the one big bad thing about Singapore is bank accounts, right? So yes, 100%. No, it's not even 50%. It's 100%. Once you have anything crypto related, you'll shut it down, right? And this is a different position from the government. Now the government is pushing the banks, but the banks say, hey, you are my license. You're the guy that's overseeing my license, and I'm not comfortable with opening these accounts, so you can't force me to open these accounts. Right? That's the problem with the Singapore.
Hang on one second. There's another thing about banks, okay? You have to understand who really runs the world. The world runs on risk, who controls risk, and where the risk is allocated. So the banks are concerned about the regulators, sure. But even if the regulator and the government are both in favor of it, unless you convince the insurance company that insures the bank, good luck. You have to look at all the French would say parties prenantes, right? All of the partners in the broadest sense of the word to understand what decisions are going to be made. Why is it that Sparkasse Austria is the one bank in Malta right now that is easier, which is not saying much, but easier to open a crypto bank account with? It's because it's a smaller bank, it's an ambitious bank, it's actually, by banking standards, EU banking standards, it's a bit of an aggressive bank, so they're willing to push back and they're willing to absorb some of that risk. That's the question. It's not regulation, it's not government pressure, is a bank hungry enough to take the risk? The biggest bank in the United States that accepts crypto routinely is called Silvergate. I happen to live in La Jolla, California. I didn't even know the bank was there when I moved there. It's less than 2 kilometers from my house, right? Try opening a bank with Silvergate and talk to Silvergate. Silvergate's inspected every 6 months by the United States Banking Authority. They get done with one inspection, they've already got a notice for the next one. There's a single family that owns that bank. It has one branch. It's a tiny little bank. It's growing like crazy. And the only thing they will do for crypto is open a bank account. That's it. They won't even give you a credit card other than doing that. Because the risk profile, the parties involved in that transaction change. So look at things from a practical perspective. Malta looks like it's got great potential, but right now it's a whole lot of potential.
Right. So to take up the conversation about the Singapore banks, now if we come in early stage, just for information, so we are full stack end-to-end ICO advisors. We're consultants, so we help ICOs, get from start to finish. So if we get clients coming to us early stage, we can intervene and get a bank account set up and tell them exactly how to do it. Now, it's not walk to the bank and say, I'm going to do a crypto business. The moment you do that, you're going to be blacklisted by all the banks. And good luck to you for the rest of that company. You've got to incorporate another company. So there are ways to get around it, but you need to know how to do it, right? And we always tell the clients as well, 2 things. Set up your Singapore bank account, that's for your operational stuff. But your crypto stuff, please don't put it into that bank account, right? If you're going to be heavy volume trading, your crypto bank account should be something offshore. So we would advise offshore jurisdictions, set up 2 bank accounts. The offshore jurisdiction, which is crypto-friendly, would be the ones that can handle the crypto transactions. And then when you want to pay your salaries, you want to do operational costs and stuff like that, then your Singapore bank account comes in.
Where is that friendly offshore jurisdiction?
We'll talk. we charge for that.
Oh, that's the fees, right?
Okay, how's the Caymans for that?
Caymans is okay, but it's not fantastic. You know, Cayman is number 2 on the hit list right now, right? So BVI just got shut down like last year. Caymans is right there in the bullseye.
Yeah, and plus I've already had one crypto-related business had its bank account shut down in the Caymans. Yeah, it's very specific, guys. It's very specific to what your business is doing, how you're presenting it, how much the cash flow is, how much you're keeping on hand. Here's the offer. My fund right now is using BMO, Bank of Montreal. Harris, actually. Their Chicago office, because that's my administrator works with. We got a notification from BMO almost 60 days ago, giving us 60 days to find another bank account or keep a minimum of $4.75 million on deposit at all times, or pay $60,000 a year, $5,000 a month, to maintain a checking account. Right? So we're exploring other banks. And you have to actively manage the banking relationship. And that will only help you. Because if you have a good relationship with some individual in the bank, he's got his risk management committee and he's got his regulator. So my advice to anybody in this room involved even tangentially in a crypto business, and I think that should include all of you, have at least 2, preferably 3 bank accounts in at least 2 different countries and use them all periodically. That actually does a nice thing for you because it'll lower the transaction volume through any single bank account. And it's also what I was talking about, jurisdictional diversification, infrastructure diversification. You have to diversify your operations because the world toward crypto right now is a bit of an unfriendly place. And I said right now, I'll go into that if I ever start my presentation.
It's next, right?
Right. So there are some things in this space. For example, one major project that we are launching ourselves, we are coming up with a crypto bank. So this is to reduce the friction in the entire ecosystem, and we are using fintech solutions. There are banks in Australia. There are a couple of banks in Liechtenstein. There are 1 or 2 German banks. There are a few Swiss banks. They are all okay with crypto payments, right? There are, of course, a bunch of US banks, and we also use Silvergate, of course, right? And Gemini uses it as well. And so there are a few, but it's still difficult. So increasingly, there are smaller banks coming up. I mean, if the big boys don't want to play, then the small boys come up and play. So you just have to find these correct banking relationships and get them started. Yeah.
Sounds good. It sounds like we all have kind of battle scars around that we can talk about over drinks tonight in between, while we're watching the game. But that's the end of the time we have for this panel. I want to make sure that you have enough time to present your talk. We've heard a lot of the questions. Maybe I'm sure a lot of the questions will apply to after we've heard the talk. So maybe we should just move along from here. But I wanted to thank you guys again. Give us a round of applause to our experts up here for sharing their opinions.